You are audible very much.
Okay. Sorry, I mean technology. We're talking about digital transformation, and technology does play a very important role in that process. But then when we talk about technology, there are challenges. I'm sure. I will talk about initiatives which we have embarked upon in India. And those of you who do not know Marks and Spencer, it's a London-based company, and it's a 100-year-old company. It was established in 1884, and we came to India in sometime around 2009, and today we have around 93 stores. And you must have gone, not sure if we have a store in Indore, but we have quite a lot of stores in now B cities, and then very soon we'll be also going forward. Apart from, of course, operating our stores here, we do a lot of sourcing from this region. When you say sourcing, which means we buy a lot of clothing and also food. We have established in India as of now. Very soon we are doing some research on that count. Our food is pretty, I think, favorite, among people who have visited our London stores. But I'll be speaking, specifically from a supply chain perspective. And from that perspective, I take care of India and Sri Lanka. So when we talk about SDGs, I think when people migrated from Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goal, the whole idea was very clear that it's very important to be specific and smart about our goals. So most of the SDGs which you see, 17 of them all, they are pretty focused, and most of them have timelines, maybe 10 till 2030. Marks and Spencer as a company, because we believe in our ethos, we have been really focusing on sustainability from a very long time. And if I may say, SDGs complement about our sustainable goals. So our sustainability is actually embedded in our business goals, and that's why we have mapped all our sustainable development goals under something called Plan A. Now, why do we call that Plan A? Because we believe there is no Plan B. So there's only one Plan A. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that our journey have been phenomenal, and we started sometime from 1990. Hang on. Have you gone to the second slide, please? So we started from 1990s, and in fact, it was so popular that that point of time, our CEO, Mr. Stuart Rhodes, got a knighthood in the British government. So when we started in early 90s, the focus was more on community investments, followed by 2000, when we actually brought in single issues managed by team on edge of business. So it was essentially corporate social responsibility. Then it was 2007, we embarked upon this ambitious program called Plan A. The focus was more on reduction of social and the environmental footprint. So when we say social and environmental footprint, we have our uh, stores, and we also have our sourcing supply chain. We source across more than 53 countries. So wherever we go, obviously, every intervention has a foot plan, and both environment and social. So the idea was to how do we reduce that footprint, and then and then second thing was how do you bring it and integrate with the business. So 2010, we did just that. So we integrated into processes and systems. Then obviously you can't change the world alone. So that's why in 2014, we launched Plan A 2020, where the focus was more about building partnerships with like-minded people. And then most recently, we did a course correction and we came up with Plan A 2025. So we identified our stakeholders. So essentially, you have our customers. Now, customers could be internal customers, external customers, customers who are the end recipient of our goods, or the suppliers. They are also our customers. So that's why we bring them all together, because they have a role to play, and that's where the whole thing about partnership comes in. And so the focus now, obviously, when we also integrated with our SDGs. So we also thought apart from engagement with our customers and colleagues, it was also important to bring in business model innovation. So here, if you go to the next slide, I mean, you can see the SDGs, 17 of them, and I have actually drawn correlation between our focus and how they complement with SDGs. So we have put our focus into three buckets. First talks about well-being, second talks about community, and third talks about. So if you want to know more about our Plan A 2025, the document is available online, and you can Google search it. And then if you can compare with what I have shown here, so each page of that report actually talks about different overlaps with what the SDGs have with our commitments. So if you go to the next slide, you will see this is in a nutshell what our Plan A 2025 is, which means that by 2025 we have made 100 commitments among these three pillars. First pillar is nourishing well-being, which means helping more than 10 million people live happier and healthier lives. So whether the engagement what we do with the community or with our customers, whether we serve food, for example, I mean, if you now ever purchase Marks and Spencer food, there are specific calorific value limits, which actually ensures that the person gets the customers get the right calories, the right quantities. So we, as a responsible retailer, we have that sustainable aspect in mind. Then if you talk about the second pillar, so what we have decided is we'll be helping transform around 1,000 communities. So the communities which are near our stores, and from a sourcing office strategy also, in India also we have made certain interventions. So we're talking about transforming individuals or we're transforming communities. And obviously, this is the part of a triple bottom line approach. Nothing is complete if we do not talk about environment. So that's where we come to a third bucket. It talks about care. So essentially zero waste business. And now obviously spend responsibly and spend sustainably. So that is what our motto is. If we go to the next slide, here, in a broad way, you will see what are our different Plan A 2025 themes. So when I say themes, so across all these buckets, I mean, these themes, they come under the broader buckets I explained in my previous slide. So we have made around 100 commitments, and all these commitments run up to 2025, the year 2025. And then we have a monitoring mechanism as to see how we are progressing against that target. So whether you talk about customer engagement, you talk about well-being, you talk about communities, I talk about raw material prioritization, transparency, for example, zero waste, or if you talk about product attributes, human rights, for example, so these are different themes where we have made commitments. Again, if you go to see our document Plan A 2025, you will see detailed explanation of what I mean when I say this. Then if you go to the next slide, so I'd like to say something about our human rights strategy. Again, it goes until 2020. So 2012 to 2016. So we have actually, the strategy has been kind of, divided into 3 stages. The first stage was between 2012 and 2016, where we made a commitment to respect human rights and embedding this commitment throughout the company. Second, the next step was, of course, 2017 to 2018, improve identification and management of salient risks. So this could be anywhere. It could be business risk, it could be risk which is in the supply chain. Because it's very important that when you understand human rights, it requires a fundamental rethink of the way we look at issues. It's very easy to say that, what is the perspective? It could be a perspective from business, but essentially it is the perspective from the risk of individual. So then now what we are looking at is 18 and 20 to 2020, we are promoting and supporting human rights. In fact, we were one of the first companies, foreign companies in India, who had done a human rights conference, wherein we invited our peers, our competitors, and our suppliers, our employees, and we, released the modern day slavery toolkit, which actually equips every individual to identify forced labor in the supply chain. Also, issues like discrimination, issues that relates to human rights abuses. If you go to the next slide, as I said, it's very important, to identify the business risk. So we actually talked, we got a third party globally who were assigned to do a research in the countries where we were operational, right from United States to Egypt to Ethiopia to China to India to Sri Lanka, Thailand, Vietnam. And they came up, they did a detailed research. So it was not essentially that, whether it was our footprint, but, it was a detailed research into what could be the human right risk, per country. So, for example, whether you talk about living wages, we talked about water and sanitation, discrimination, forced labor, working hours, child labor, land rights, customer security, secure work environment, health and safety, etc. And then accordingly, we made our countrywide strategy. So if you go to the next slide, Marks and Spencer is one of the few companies who have been very, very transparent about our footprint. So, for example, so we have openly, released our, supply base. So all you need to do is, log into our website and you want to see your factory, which is, available from where we source, and you can instantly see whether it's a food factory or it's a garment factory or it's a home factory. So now this was the global outlook. We as a company, we are very, very coherent in our approach. So Planet 2025 is a global document. So anything which we do across the world, it has to feed back into that central document called Planet 2025. So if you go to the next slide, so our story in India, what are we doing in India, from a SDG perspective? So one of the first things which we embarked upon, so I mean, as a company, of course, we have our own program. So, but also one of the commitments as a company is we would like to, look at industry-wide transformation. So, if you look at the textiles, because in India, essentially, we are sourcing and selling garments. And the focus is more on the garment manufacturing hubs, whether it's Delhi NCR or we talk about MP to some extent, it is coming up in a big way, or South India. So what we did was, when we actually did the risk assessment, one of the things that came up as a risk in India was gender inequality. So what we did was we tied up with the British High Commission in India. So obviously British company and British government, they come together and then partner with the Indian companies. So the idea was to actually create a pilot, and so the project had three prongs intervention. The first was factory intervention, which means creating safe working environment for women workers. So in fact, if you look at our Planet 2025 document, which clearly says that gender equality is one of our motto. So much so that we have made a commitment that by 2023, all our supplier partners would have 25% of their workforce as female managers. So we'll be working with them. We are still working with them, and that's why we designed this program. So one of the elements, if you see, is number 3, is called the career progression component. So career progression, which empowers women workforce and builds an enabling work environment to establish a pathway for women's leadership within factory settings. Then, of course, we had community intervention as another approach, because we live in a gender unequal society, and gender inequality is prevalent, everywhere. I think it's in the culture. So it's very important to sensitize. So you do not create. The idea is not to create enemies of men, or maybe create villains of men. The idea is to actually sensitize them, because we stay in a society which has normalized behavior. People do not understand what is biology and what is gender, because gender is something that has been shaped by the society, whereas biology is designed by nature. So most of these things actually they become normalized, and so that was the focus, that we will go beyond factory walls and train our people. Whereas in factory, of course, because factory is an institution and they have to uphold gender equality, accountability, and also responsibilities. So this is again, very, very much in line with SDG 5. Then we talk about well-being. So this is a very interesting program which we embarked upon with our CSR project. So I mean, the previous project was more about from a business project, because it was more about the factories with whom we were working. But we also went to community, and the intervention was essentially a health intervention. We started sometime around 2016. And if you look at the dashboard today, I mean, look at these ladies. I mean, the first time I went there, along with the team for needs assessment, they were all in ghungats. And today, all these ladies, they are wearing aprons. They are leaders in their own right. In fact, during the COVID crisis, we got our employees to volunteer in tele-counseling, because, where we actually implemented this program, it's a small pocket called Mohammadpur near Gurgaon. And, it has a lot of migrant workers. And you must have all seen, how COVID had actually, affected these people. And so we got our employees to spend around 20 to 30 hours to do psychological, counseling. In fact, and it actually gave a very interesting insight to the team also, because what happens is, generally when you do a project, it's the CSR team only which does projects, and then and then the business team is more focused on making money. So when they actually, from a routine work, suddenly they start hearing, of course they went through a training. The NGO with whom we had partnered, they had actually trained these people on listening skills and what to say, what not to say. They were uh, clear escalation procedures that were kind of established. So when you are saying and talking, and suddenly somebody comes and says that I have suicidal tendencies, it hits your heart, and then you realize that that what, as a company, apart from making money, making profits, what is the corporate social responsibility? So they felt proud, and they were more connected to the company. Then we also did a very interesting training called Leadership for Life. If you go to the next slide. So, that program was, done in collaboration with the UK NGO, and we trained around 23,000 plus workers. Now, what did we train? I mean, when you talk about leadership, suddenly you will think about senior people, maybe in NGOs, senior people in corporates. So we brought the same principles to the level of a worker, a factory worker. And suddenly, there was a paradigm shift in their thinking. And, and after this training, there were different modules, and the focus was on mindfulness. And also, after the training program, the participants were expected to, do a project which actually talked about what they always wanted to do. So it was a big hit. Then if you go to the next stage, next slide, this is another thing which we did, was promoting responsible migration of women migrant workers in the garment supply chain. So here, what we did was, this is again inspired by the issue of interstate migrant workers, and again the COVID crisis laid bare some of these systemic inefficiencies. And what we did was, we looked at Jharkhand as the source district, because we know a lot of workers, they come from Jharkhand and they end up either working in South India or North India. And the other, as a destination, we took Delhi NCR, and we did a research and found correlation, looking at what are the patterns of migration, specifically looking at the Marks and Spencer supply chain, and what are the issues faced by the migrant workers, what are the vulnerabilities faced by these people. And again, this was again done in partnership with the British government. So this was a pilot. Then obviously we'll think about doing a scale up very soon. Then if you go to the next slide, uh, this essentially relates to environment, right? But I think this is a new theory. I think that's everybody's talking about. It is called just transition, because everybody says now enough of linear economy. So a linear economy has is consumes more resources. A linear economy actually puts a lot of pressure on the environment. So the idea is to how to actually go from a cradle to a cradle approach. So one of the things, if you have ever purchased in Marks and Spencer, you would see hangers, and these hangers are actually bought. So again, every year billions of hangers, and again, in terms of wastage, it is actually added. I mean, you talk about ocean plastic. So plastic is a big, bane in our civilization. So much so, in fact, you see plastic in the Antarctic region also. So microplastic is everywhere, even in the water we drink, the food we eat. So we took a very small step. We said, okay, fine. Why don't we actually start reusing our hangers? But then I didn't want to actually look it at as a environmental perspective. we said, why don't we actually look at a just transition? So when we actually, so because it's very simple. So if you are saying linear economy, which means, let's say we procure virgin plastic. Now virgin plastic is procured and you make hangers out of it. Now if you do not, send back the hangers, or you do not buy new hangers from virgin plastic, so obviously what happens is there is a wage loss, or there is a loss of employment, because you are recycling it. So what happens is, we said, okay, why don't we actually use the social aspect also? So this is what we call this just transition from linear to circular. So what we did was, we got workers from the community. I mean, people from the community who were staying. So we said, okay, fine, we will, use this as a livelihood plugin to our existing CSR project, the health project. So from there, from the community, we recruited people, and I'm happy to report. In fact, we reinvested a surplus of 25 lakhs, and we planted 400 trees in Bangalore. So we did in Mohammadpur and also Bangalore. We saved around 90,000 kgs of virgin plastic, 1.5 million hangers threaded and recycled to make hangers, and we had wages worth 38 lakhs for the people who had actually participated. So on one hand, it was good for the environment. On the other hand, it was also good for the social. Then the next slide, if you go, uh, I don't know if you've heard about Oxfam. So this is one of the 2025 commitment. So, it now talks about that we'll enter into a new collaboration with Oxfam over 3 years, focusing on the UK and India to develop a deeper understanding of the connection between our sourcing practices and our human rights impact. So we have already done this project, and we allowed the Oxfam team access to our supply chain. And they did a research. The report is not yet come. Uh, Interesting thing what we are doing in our UK stores and also in our India stores is there's something called shopping. So in UK, Oxfam has got their own outlets. So we encourage our customers to actually get their old clothes, and they put the clothes in the trays which are managed by Oxfam. So these clothes are put there and they are refurbished and they are sold. Similarly, of course, we are not reselling the clothes, but we are donating the clothes to Bunj, and they are doing they needfully. They are spreading the garments and again, recreating the garments. So this is what we have in terms of a story. So now the question is, if you go to next slide, what are our key learnings? So it takes a long time, just getting to starting the tough stuff. I mean, human rights, it's easier said than done because there are different actors involved. So business and human rights is something in which the focus is essentially less policing, but more using our economic leverage, look at the negotiation more, look at training. So that's why, there's a lot of education perspective so that the people understand from where we are coming in. Second is, of course, platform is important. We have to look at a platform approach. We cannot make any change on our own. So that's why we talked about collaboration. And when you talk about key to make human rights relatable, it's very important that you see the different aspects of the business, right from you source, right from the cotton, in fact. And then, in fact, I don't know if many of you know that there is a law in UK which it's called Modern Day Slavery Act, and similarly a law in US which says California Transparency in Supply Chains Act. So if there are cases of forced labor or trafficking in our supply chain, so when I say supply chain, it starts all the way from cotton. So that's why we're responsible for our cotton farmers, we're responsible for our dyeing industry, we're responsible for our spinning industry, we're responsible for our garment industry, and also, last but not the least, the stores from where we sell our clothes. So there are different challenges at different levels. So that's why it's very important that we identify these areas, and we have already done it, and we are part of different initiatives. And then of course it's very important that that you establish the right governance, or you have to invest in cross business practitioners. And of course every day is learning, and sharing is something which is so important, that it would not